Many Vermonters will ask how secession would affect them. Seniors, for example, will be concerned about their Social Security and Medicare benefits, which you address on page 88 of your book. Investors will be concerned about their investments in U.S. government bonds. Can you reassure our viewers that secession would not cause them to suffer severe losses?
Well, let me answer the question in general terms first. It kind of begs the question of is it possible that a tiny state with 620,000 people like Vermont, could it survive as an independent republic? And my answer is you better believe it. And we can look at the fact that of the 200 or so independent republics scattered around the world, 50 of them actually have smaller populations than Vermont. And of the 10 richest countries measured in per capita income, 4 of those, including Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Bermuda, and Iceland, in the top 10 are all much smaller than tiny Vermont. But to address the specific issues like Medicare, Social Security, government bonds, and say government spending from the U.S. government to Vermont, it turns out that for every dollar that we pay into the federal government in taxes, we give back about $1.10, $1.12. That's about $500 million a year. And someone will say, well, that's a lot of money, but it probably is not a lot of money because there are so many unfunded and underfunded government-mandated programs that we have to participate in whether we want to or not, and then we have to raise that money on top of the $1 that I spoke of previously, that it's probably a wash. The $500 million it probably is meaningless. But to address Social Security as a recipient, such as myself, if the U.S. government doesn't honor its contractual commitment to me, based on what I've paid into the system, then in a sense all bets are off. See, what people don't realize that I could live in Vermont, Saudi Arabia, Brazil, wherever, they're obliged to send me my monthly check no matter what. Now, obviously, younger people who are not recipients yet, there will have to be a new Social Security system financed by Vermont if we want to continue that. And then Medicare, for sure, that will have to be a Vermont version because Medicare pays virtually no benefits if you become ill outside of the United States. But what Vermont is well down the pipe in its thinking on developing health care services for all Vermonters. Then the question of government bonds, at this particular moment, that's an interesting question because even though it's the U.S. government, the Federal Reserve Bank, the Treasury, in collaboration with Wall Street, created the financial mess that we're in, U.S. Treasury bonds are still the preferred safe haven investment. And by virtue of so much money flowing into these Treasury bonds, the interest rates are near zero. They're extremely low at the present time as the risk goes up. And I think that's a temporary phenomenon. I don't think that long-term U.S. government bonds are going to be a safe haven for anybody. And I think there'll be a flight out of those into more durable assets like gold and silver.
You're familiar with the TIPS bonds, the Treasury Inflation Protected Bonds, and they're sold as if they were as good as gold because if there's inflation, the bond takes care of that. And there are many people that bought them years ago, and they get 5% interest. And you add the 5% interest to the 5% inflation, they're making 10% return on their bonds right today, even with the. But then it occurs to me that maybe, if Vermont leaves, well, the government in Washington would say, well, okay, goodbye. We're going to keep all the money. Yeah, that would not be
Well, all of which money?
your investments in our bonds.
Oh.
And you said that you can collect Social Security anywhere in the world, but that's not quite true. I read the book at the Social Security office, and there are some exceptions, like if you live in Cuba, and there are a few other countries, I think Libya is one, they cut your Social Security off after 3 months.
That's interesting. I did not know that. So if you are actually living in Cuba, yeah, okay, that's. But then, for law-abiding tiny state like Vermont to do that, I think that wouldn't play very well on the international political stage. Cuba was demonized so by the United States and other countries that they can perhaps get by with that with Cuba. It would be a tough sell, I think, to demonize tiny Vermont to justify such an extreme action. Sometimes people say, well, the U.S. government might impose a trade embargo on Vermont, and my response to that is thank God for Canada, because Canada never honored the trade embargo on China or on Cuba. It's hard to imagine that Canada and Quebec would embargo trade with Vermont.
I know when I lived in Montreal, people were going to Cuba on vacation all the time. It was a great place to go on vacation. It's just outrageous that we're supposed to be free, and yet we're not free to travel to another country. The population of Vermont is only about 623,000. On pages 51 and 52 of your book, you cite Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, and Iceland as countries which are smaller than Vermont, but nevertheless among the 10 richest countries in the world. Do you believe that Vermont should go down the road to independence alone, or should it seek to join together with other states and or Canadian provinces?
The supporters of Vermont independence, I guess, are of different points of view on that topic. Many would like to see Vermont go it alone. There's another school of thought who would like to see us join Canada, become a new province of Canada, or perhaps team up with Quebec. My own fantasy would be to see Vermont join Maine and New Hampshire and maybe the Atlantic provinces of Canada, create a little country about the size of Denmark, maybe call it Nova Scotia, and have the benefits of a small to moderate size country economically, politically. That would be my ideal.
At this time, there's no real independence movement in New Hampshire or Maine, is there?
Oh, well, there's the Free State Project in New Hampshire, which is not strictly speaking an independence movement in the sense of that secession. There are secessionists in that group, but that's not at the top of their agenda. You alluded to it earlier. The Free State Project is more interested in kind of creating a libertarian state. Maybe that's an oxymoron in New Hampshire, that would kind of be free of taxes, free of anything except minimal government. The idea is to try and get 20,000 people to move there to achieve this. Under 1,000 have moved there so far. There are a lot of secessionists in Maine, many of them around the Maine novelist Carolyn Chute, but they're not organized. Then up in Nova Scotia, there is some activity related to this idea of a Nova Scotia and the possibility of a political party oriented around that up in Nova Scotia.
I know when I lived in Montreal, I was there at the time when Quebec was very active in trying to secede, and they said that, well, if Quebec secedes, that cuts Canada in half. So the Atlantic provinces would then be left adrift.
Right.
So they would be a natural group to combine with Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont.
Right, if Quebec were to split. And as you know, Quebec's secessionist tendencies kind of ebb and flow. They seem to be, for the moment, on a current upswing, having declined after 1995's near miss with their referendum.